So welcome. Welcome to everyone to the observatory at Harvard University, this observatory of the Instituto Cervantes at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. As you may already know, the mission of the Cervantes Observatorio is to observe, to analyze, and to debate on the Spanish language and Hispanic cultures in the United States. In order to accomplish this mission, the Observatorio organizes and hosts academic activities regarding the current situation of Spanish language in the United States, their minorities, the teaching of foreign languages, especially Spanish, and the culture and thought in Spanish. The Observatorio obviously observes and then explains what is observed. To this goal, we publish the journal Informes del Observatorio, Observatorio Reports, which is a free online and monthly and bilingual journal. And you may find it the Observatorio Reports out there, even the new report we are presenting here. However, the Observatorio has published a special printed edition of the last report, because not by chance. It's a report by Isaac García, Diego García, Miguel Álvarez-Fernández, and Ferrer-Molina. The title, the report is here. And the title in English is Overview of the Relationship among the United States, Spain, and Hispanic America in the Field of Sound Art. When we finish this conversation, you may pick up your free copy out there. We only got the Spanish version so far, but in a few days it will be ready, the English version of this report online and on paper also. So this event today is to launch our report number 8. It is also the first Observatorio report about music, specifically about sound art. Pay attention, as always, to the relations and influences between the United States, Latin America, and Spain. And one of the authors, Isaac Diego García, will present the goals and guidelines of this Observatorio report, and Professor Jaime Oliver will speak about sound art. Besides, we got a musical surprise for you today by Jaime Oliver. And on the top of that, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions and comment and chat with the 3 authors of the paper and Jaime Oliver. Ultimately, we want this to be a conversation. And for a good conversation, it's essential the authority of a moderator, the guide of a chairperson. And this person is today Professor Kay Shelemy. And I want to express my deeper gratitude to Professor Shelemy, not only for being here today, this evening, but for being a very, very good friend of the Cervantes Observatorio at Harvard. Kay Kaufman Shelemy is Professor of Music at Harvard University. She is Professor of African and African American Studies. She is an expert in ethnomusicology, who is specialized in musics of Africa, the Middle East, and the urban United States. Her current research is on music and migration. In 2011, she edited a special double volume of the journal Diaspora, a journal of transnational studies, and a new edition of the textbook Soundscapes, Exploring Music in a Changing World will be published in 2015. Shelemy has received fellowships from Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute, and many other agencies, as well as major prizes for her publications. Currently, Kay Kaufman Shelemy serves as a chair of the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration, and Rights in this faculty, in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and she's also an active member of the Observatorio Steering Committee, and we feel very proud of it. Thank you, Professor Shelemy, for sharing with us your precious time in this hectic midterm, and thank you all for coming out to the Observatorio facilities. And now, join me, please, to welcome Kay Shelemy. Please do the honors.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to receive a new colleague and a new organization here at Harvard, and one with which we can collaborate so fully. So this is our wonderful floor of the arts and international cultural activity, and we welcome you to the beautiful facility that we share, which is very, very nice. But the Observatorio has been a marvelous addition to the arts and the humanities at Harvard, and many, many of us are very happy to have it here, all of us, I would say. So this event, as you now know, launches a new issue of the Observatorio Reports, and it focuses on links between the United States and Spanish-speaking countries in the fields of sound art and experimental music. And the work will be presented by its three authors, musicologists and Spanish sound artists, Ferrer-Molina, Isaac Diego García, and Miguel Alvarez-Fernández. And you have our three principals right here. Also, the event features the special collaboration of Jaime Oliver, a Peruvian sound artist and professor of composition at New York University, which is one of my old haunts as well. And he will present a performance of his creative work. So we have a very, very nice program, and we're very glad to welcome you all. And I think we have discussion to follow and then treats after that, I understand, which will be very, very nice. So I think we should turn to our presentations, and let me introduce each of our guests. And we'll first have the presentation of the new Observatorio by Isaac Diego Garcia on behalf of the three authors. And Isaac Diego Garcia is a musicologist, a composer, a sound artist, a performer, and a singer. And in 2011, he finished his PhD in experimental music in Spain at the University of Oviedo. He studied classic guitar, Renaissance lute, voice, and choir conducting at different conservatories in both Madrid and at Oviedo University, Spain. In 2009, he was guest researcher at the Experimental Intermedia Foundation of New York with the composer and video artist Phil Niblock. And we look forward to your presentation, and thank you for being with us today. Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will speak on behalf of my colleagues, Miguel Álvarez-Fernández, Ferrer-Molina, and myself, Isaac Diego García. We are very pleased and honored to present this report entitled Overview of the Relationship among the United States, Spain, and Hispanic America in the field of sound art. We would like to thank very much Francisco Moreno for his kind invitation, as well as Observatory of Spanish Language and Hispanic Culture in the United States at Harvard University. I thank also Professor Jaime Oliver for joining us in this event and sharing this experience with us. I'd also like to thank Professor Seleme for her introduction. The report we present today focuses on the relationships between the United States and Spanish-speaking countries concerning experimental music and sound art. One definition of sound art could be: sound art is an artistic discipline that engages with acoustics, psychoacoustics, electronic noise music, audio media, exploration of the human body, sculpture, films or video, and an ever-expanding set of subjects that are part of the current discourse of contemporary art. We have analyzed the presence of Spanish and Latin American experimental musicians and sound artists in the United States and the reception of the American sound art in Spanish-speaking countries. The aim of this comparative study is to analyze the nature of this relationship. We have questioned its possible symmetry or asymmetry, its causes and consequences. Up until now, international relations in sound art is an almost unexplored field of research. Therefore, we have decided to start our study with a review of the historical origins of these practices, which led to current situation. We have examined our topic in different contexts, such as the academic field, non-institutional spaces, art galleries, art centers, festivals, radio broadcasts, publications, and so on. The differences between the academic context in the USA on one hand and in Spanish-speaking countries in the other have shown themselves as particularly revealing. The first striking aspect is the unidirectional flow of Spanish and Latin American students to the United States. This flow does not occur in the opposite direction. Both in Spain and in Latin America, there are no curricula mainly devoted to sound art and experimental music. In the US, however, sound art has been linked to university environments since 1950s. The reason for this becomes clear when we take a look at the university curricula of both cultural contexts. As defined by D. Higgins, sound art and experimental music are, by their nature, intermedia, as they develop themselves between different artistic disciplines. Neither in Latin America nor in Spain there has been a tradition in the field of intermedia in the academic world. On the other hand, we find different American universities hosting intermedia departments or interdisciplinary curricula where diverse artistic practices are combined and can become a specific degree. These universities offer the possibility of developing an academic career that combines teaching, researching, and artistic creation, which are not usually found in the Spanish-speaking countries. As a result of this, many artists of this area are attracted toward the possibility of pursuing graduate studies in the United States. This report also presents an analysis of the migratory flows described by sound artists and experimental musicians to and from the USA. Many cases have been researched for the report, showing some clean patterns. First, sound artists who have graduated in US and are working as teachers in American universities. For example, the case of Nicholas Collins, Andrew Raffo-Dewar, and others. Second, sound artists who are teaching in US but graduated and studied in their countries of origin. The case, for example, of Gustavo Matamoros. Three, sound artists who having studied in the USA return to their countries to work for the university. It is the case, for example, of Manuel Rocha Iturbide. 4, sound artists who, having studied in USA, return to their country to work outside the academic world. It is the case of Emiliano del Cerro, Rafael Liñán, and Ricardo Arias. Finally, American sound artists who have left their country and settled in Spanish-speaking areas. It is the case, for example, of Wayne Matthews and Barbara Held. Other institutions, such as art galleries, contemporary art centers, and others, have also gathered our attention. From this comparative analysis, we can extract some relevant conclusions. As an example, one interesting detail is the existence of sound art and experimental music residency programs in US, which in Spain and Latin America have always and only been linked to visual arts. These programs are very attractive platform for foreign artists, as they allow the investigation, development, and the possibility to show their work internationally. As a final conclusion, we observe that production of experimental music created in Spanish-speaking areas are not as well represented in American institutions. We can mention three main causes for this. First, the cultural policies in the areas that have been studied differ in their support for experimental music and sound art. Second, In the American experimental music scene and sound art scene, there is not a perception of the absence that concerns production created in Spanish-speaking countries. Third, Spanish-speaking sound artists living in the USA have not developed a feeling of community among them. In fact, there are no professional associations. Another reason for the asymmetry of the migratory flows is the international relevance of the contemporary art developed in the United States, especially in New York. For Spanish and Latin American artists, USA is a privileged environment to present their own creation. To conclude, I'd like to thank once again the Cervantes Observatorio at Harvard University for giving us the opportunity to publish this report. In our opinion, the value of this work lies not only in its content, but in its pioneering nature, as it addresses a field of research not explored so far. Our humble wish is that this report will serve as a reference point for the development of future projects and musicological research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. It's an exciting publication, and we will discuss it more with your colleagues, who I will also introduce in just a few moments. But right now, we have Jaime Oliver, who is Assistant Professor of Composition at New York University and co-director of the NYU Waverly Labs for Computing and Music, and he obtained his PhD in computer music from the University of California, San Diego in 2011, where he studied with Miller Puckett and was a Mellon postdoctoral fellow also at Columbia University in New York before moving down to NYU. So we are very glad to have you, and I gather you're going to make some comments and talk about the sound art, and then we'll have a performance? Yes. Perfect. Please, the floor is yours.
So, thank you for coming first. Paco, Dr. Fernandez mentioned a musical surprise. The surprise for me was that I would have to talk, which I didn't think I would. But it makes sense, and I think it's actually, I realized that I am kind of the subject, right? I migrated, and I am one of those that graduated in the US and now stayed and teach here. And the issue is interesting, right? Because it's true that in academia, in Latin America, sound art or experimental music are not fields that you would encounter, generally speaking. There are some cases, and but I would argue that things are changing. I would argue that there are feelings of community sometimes. I've organized, among other things, forums for computer music in Latin America, and there is a sense of a digital community that extends even Latin America, and we met in the weirdest of all circumstances. I can tell you the story later, but as it pertains to what we're talking today, there are things that are changing, and being in the US has actually made me even more active in Latin America. So I spend half of my time there, and there are quite a bit of events that you can attend, but the funding and the institutional support that you need as a musician does not exist. However, it doesn't exist pretty much. I mean, it's gradually being less and less supported everywhere in the world, right? So teaching positions are actually harder to get by, especially for creative musicians or creative artists. And so we are an endangered species in a growing world. So that's that. So about what I'm going to present today, I started working on these ideas while I was in Peru. And even though it was outside of academia, it was still sort of an academic endeavor. You still have to find who's doing what, and there is a lot of research going on outside of academia. It just doesn't take the same form, and it doesn't have the same fields where you go, like conferences and such. So I did have a time where I learned to program, which was sort of a revelatory moment, and which literally changed how I did things. And so this is part of the, it's always a work in progress, and it is an attempt to convert gesture into sound, right? Which is, I guess, a human obsession for history. So what I'm doing here, just so that we can get it out of the way, how does it work? It's essentially a video camera that is analyzing hand gestures, and those hand gestures are transformed into parameters that are numerical, and those numerical parameters are applied to control sound. And the sounds themselves are hunted across the internet or recorded from musician friends with whom I've collaborated in the past. And so it's this mix of sound worlds that I try to bring together. And so I guess I'll perform a little bit, and then we'll take it from there. Yes? Okay.
Thank you. That was terrific. Really. I'm sure we will have many, many questions and comments. I think now what we should do is bring our other two participants into the conversation, our other two co-authors. First of all, Miguel Alvarez-Fernández is a sound artist, a musicologist, a sound theorist, and a curator. And after his studies in composition at the Conservatorio of El Escorial, Madrid, he was appointed composer in residence at the Historical Residence de Estudiantes, correct, between 2002 and 2005. Since 2008, he has hosted Ars Sonora, a weekly radio broadcast featuring experimental music and sound art, aired on Spanish National Radio. And Ferrer-Molina is a sound artist, musicologist, conductor, and critic. We understand why you all get along now, with degrees in guitar, piano, conducting, musicology, and composition at different conservatories of Valencia and Madrid, Spain. He studied electroacoustic composition, mostly at LEA, that's the Conservatory of Valencia, and at Reina Sofia in Madrid. Since 2014, Ferrer-Molina has been president of the Spanish Society of Electroacoustic Composers. And I think now we know all the participants, and we've heard the music and heard about the publication, and we open the floor to your questions to one or all of our guests. Please. I'm sure you must have some. Please.
I was wondering how, in English or Spanish?
Please in English if you
okay,
would. Yes, thank you.
I was wondering how you were inspired. I mean, there's a whole lot of sound artists that you, that are not related to academia, and I'm wondering, for example, I mean, where does it start? Does it start with John Cage, or who starts to do this kind of art and sound? And how does this inspire you? How did you get to that, being that there wasn't that much academic?
Actually, yes. We can do this right
I
here.
think we can just do it by, all right.
Okay.
I don't know that I can do it then. Well, where does it start is a very interesting question, right? And who writes history and that sort of thing. So Cage is certainly a reference and an interesting figure. And poetically, I think, I mean, his writing is very suggestive, and it gives you a lot of space for you to fill in the blanks, right? His music, however, did not particularly inspire me for the stuff that I do for my own work. So where does it start? I've as part of my research when I was in Lima, I recorded, I went to the Archaeology Museum and recorded their pre-Columbian instrument collection. And there are devices that are literally mind-blowing, I guess would be the term, right? I mean, they really surprise you because they're instruments. I mean, there are some instruments that behave just about like any other instrument in the world, that, you know, blowing on tubes and plucking something or hitting a drum or membrane. But there were others which are vessels filled with water that communicate and create bubbles that activate whistles, and you get and in fact I have a few of those sounds, I think, here. And then you have other things that are simpler than that, like parrots, or what seem to me like parrots. Now, if you think of that sound in terms of, you know, American experimental music, then it sounds like a synthesizer with a, you know, noise with a filter. But for me, there'll always be parrots. So, I mean, the range of musicians that inspire a person are just innumerable, and I wouldn't feel comfortable, you know, saying one name. But if I had to say one, then I would refuse to answer. I don't know. Maybe I should just say one, right? For example. Five names. Okay, well, I'll say one. So just because I have one in my mind now. So this, for example, this is a little homage to Jean-Claude Risset, because he made this analysis of bells, and one of the first people to synthesize them, and he wrote down the formula that he had discovered to you know, synthesize bells, and published it as kind of the first open source you know, code that people could consult. And, you know, these things just make impressions, and they keep coming back, and I keep going back to those things. Now, if you want to know where it starts, then we have 3 experts that might tell you where it starts, and I don't know that anybody would know.
Here we
are. Thanks. Also for the question, and yeah, probably we neither of us can properly answer the question where does it come, but at least we can make it resonate with other questions, because of course that wonderful issue unveils all the problems of genealogy. And again, as you were mentioning, Jaime, so who writes history, and from where also. And that's part of the interest, I guess, of this report, how we discover ourselves, to our amazement, that no such research had been done before. Yeah. So yeah, it's a question to ask. Yeah, why was that particular relationship between Spanish-speaking countries and American sound art or experimental music had not been a subject of interest for anybody so far? Yeah. In the conclusions of the text that you might read, that Isaac exposed some hints, might be, and we can also discuss about this. But in parallel to what Jaime was mentioning, it's for us important because, of course, we have reached in our personal biographies, I think we all 3 share this, have arrived to these areas of inquiry through figures, of course, such as Cage. And then, much afterwards, we have discovered also Spanish figures that were and remain unknown. Authors such as Juan García Castillejo. Now we are promotional here. We are in the process of translating his works into English, because these priests, actually, from Valencia, town where Ferrer-Molina comes from, he was developing since the 30s. That's to say the least problematic time in Spanish history, of course. Different industrial patents, inventions, such as the electrocomposer, where, for example, the process of composition was automated. He was fond of electronic engineering publications in Germany, also in America, but not, as far as we can know, not of John Cage's research or inventions. And he was vindicating the use of these new technological discoveries or inventions for the creation of new ideas about music, which resonates very much with historical, to use that word, text by John Cage, like Credo in or how music should develop. The theremin, we were discussing this coming here and saying that Cage was surprised or critical about the fact that the theremin was used for playing romantic music, for example, at first. So that was difficult to understand for him, of course. Well, similar things we can find in this Juan García Castillejo, only recently discovered by us, and of course through this. He was also, this is important for us to mention, presenting works that today we could only understand as sound installations. He was, as I mentioned before, coming from Valencia in the eastern part of Spain, close to the sea, and then therefore not far from the island of Mallorca, and he was wondering about the idea. He could not develop that's an important fact, but he could not, but he wrote, and very Italian, very poetically, about this. How would that be? Throwing wires down through the sea and having one speaker in Valencia, then another speaker there in Mallorca, and these speakers will reproduce the sound created by the magnetic, the perturbations of the magnetic fields through the, I mean, that will be a pioneering work even today, 2015, and hopefully we'll pay an homage to Castillejo. So that's a strange story, yeah, coming back and forth, and also for us, geographically coming here to America in order to discover other things there in Spain. So yeah, many possibilities of answering that question.
Maybe you would like to give some more responses as well?
Well, yes, I'd like to point out that this is new for everyone who is here, almost everyone who is here, and it is not because he didn't exist, or he didn't create, or he didn't write about it. It's because it didn't get to us through channels of information. He never had a place in the university. He wrote a book with his own funding, with his own money. He wrote a book that remained in the basement of a library in Valencia for decades. And suddenly a sound artist, friend of us and teacher of us, by accident found it. And he was shocked. He was shocked. And they had like this, they were selling it for like $1. And nobody knew the value of that book. But if you read it, you realize that if you think of it in terms of sound art, which we have now, but not in the 30s, it is marvelous, absolutely marvelous. But the Spanish mentality in the 30s and 40s, when he created this self-composer machine, or these sound installations we could consider, or giving the responsibility of choosing the notes of the music, the pitches, to a fish. Those things are amazing, and chance in music, even before Cage said that. And what's the difference? What we find is that we find that it's extremely, it is marvelous that the American Academy could make all these people that develop this kind of new things, the thoughts for music. They find a place for them inside the Academy. And we find that, unfortunately, the Spanish Academy could never do that. That's the main difference in our point of view.
Perhaps there are more questions or comments? Please, Mary.
This is moving me to dig deep into memory. I was a Fulbright student in Madrid 50 years ago now, believe it or not, and my boyfriend then, later my husband, was a musicologist, whom Kay knows, and my daughter is also a musicologist.
The whole family. It's really quite
yes,
something.
it's quite we're hung up with literature and the arts. And so I went, during that year, I went to endless numbers of concerts because the Fulbright Commission was very well connected with all the arts, and we were given tickets to every manner of concert, to festivals and so on. And
I went to several electronic music concerts in 1964 in Madrid, and it was a very strange experience. I remember clearly that one of them happened in the small, beautiful, I think 19th century concert hall where the concerts of the series called Cantar y Tañer takes place. It's right near the Puerta de Alcalá, near the Museo de Artes Decorativas. It's a beautiful little chamber hall. And I remember very clearly that on the stage sat an immense recorder, you know, an electronic recording machine. And everyone sat there as though it were going to be a performance with an artist. And suddenly someone turned this on, and unexplained noises emerged. I don't remember them well enough, but I do remember the response of the audience. It was very odd. I mean, there was sort of tittering, and it didn't, fortunately, I don't think it went on too long, because that was an era when Spanish audiences would leave after the Brahms. I mean, they wouldn't stick around for anything as bold as Shostakovich, even. And but I wonder, I have a more particular question to ask. With sound art now, is the performer, as you were today, is the performer brought back into the picture? Because this was really very disembodied. There was no explanation that I recall that this had anything to do with bodily movements, even with the movement of a fish or currents of water, anything of the kind. It was just electronic sound. And are we talking about the difference between experimental music and performance art, sound art? Or is there something happening which brings a human performer back into the equation? So I'd be curious to know, but I thought that data might be interesting to you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So that was actually a time where very composers that thought very highly of themselves wrote music that sort of made sense as a system. It still happens today, and I don't want to criticize it just for criticizing it, but it was a very disembodied experience, not just because there wasn't a body that would incarnate those sounds, but also because it was considered an intellectual endeavor. And electronic music at that time was seen as actually a way of surpassing human limits. So human limits in terms of what you could perform, how fast you could perform, but also inevitably also human limits of cognition, right? So you could put all the notes you wanted because compositionally it made sense, but then for the listener it wasn't as engaging an experience. And I would say that there is a current amongst other currents in sound art or interactive music performance where embodiment is a central aspect, as it is in the humanities, right? Embodiment is sort of it became a little bit of a keyword in the last decade, I guess. But it's not gratuitous, right? It does make sense that these sounds that disembodied might not necessarily make that much sense. When you see them attached to a body, then suddenly they kind of become alive. So yeah, I mean that would be my take on that part. But sound art is a very wide field. So
let's remember that in the 19th century tradition, the idea of a music as something which is not physical, is something out of the world, is something mystic, and the idea of the pure music, if it can be, if there's such a thing can exist, no, pure music, then the absence of the human being it's a consequence, and it gets into the mid of the 20th century and even more. But then all those ideas start having a crisis, and then the postmodernity comes, and then we rethink about everything, and then we can join that to the fact that the technique gets better and better and better and reacts to precise little movements, like we just had a demonstration. So it makes sense to retake the performance and the human body in the show again.
Other comments or questions? I guess I'm struck at how transnational sound art has become. It really is very much a global phenomenon. And I'm also struck that with each of the things, bodily motion and studies of the body, sound art has brought sound studies with it. And I guess all of you are so involved in your publication is involved in that way. And how do you all feel about crossing the boundaries between composition and scholarship about this work, these innovations that are taking place? Would you like?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question, which somehow connects with the previous one, as the role of embodiment or disembodiment has forced, could be a word, many artists, let's call still them musicians, as we call ourselves, towards fields such as performance studies, because of course. This notion of this embodiment coming from this German idealism, 19th century, and of course this spiritual notion of music is quite pervasive still today, in many aesthetical approaches to composition and teaching of composition. So even speaking about ourselves, we have found more welcoming ground eventually in fine arts faculties than in conservatories, which is a tradition, of course, in Europe, as you know. So, of course, these crossing boundaries and disciplines, which also had a lot to do with Cage. I don't know if John Cage now can be as influential in terms of music as in visual art or poetry. That's performance, of course, reflections about media, some things that even probably Cage could not imagine in his life. Sound art has this impure, as in contrast, nature, and of course impure genealogy, or this intermediate, as Isaac was pointing out before, and is mentioned in the report. So this notion of being sitting between chairs, so to say, has, of course, a lots of attractive aspects, but then coming back to the institutional dimension makes things sometimes harder. Where to fit? Or is this presentation more connected to music or musicology, or more with fine arts? And of course, that's something that, among many other interests, I think that also questions about our own methodologies and how are we contemplating things, and how are we defining categories. That's. But I don't know if I quite answered your.
You did great.
Well, okay.
Thank you. Are there other comments from our panelists, or other questions? Please, by all means, we have time.
Thank you. I have a question because it's about technology. I think art and technology in this century is becoming, together engaged. So, as an artist, how do you feel dealing with technology? Is a bottleneck, or are you maybe becoming a engineer? I don't know. I'm very interested on that point of view.
Well, so I guess it depends what you mean by technology, right? So if technology is something you plug into the wall, then without electricity you wouldn't be able to do anything, for instance. But technology and music have been working hand in hand for as long as music exists, I would guess. Because you can also think of technology as technique, right? As how to do as much as the actual objects we call technology. But then if you go to the Heideggerian thing, then you can also think of ideas, like how do you think about music is already a technology, right? Or McLuhan called the alphabet a technology, right? So, you know, it's, I think, technology in our minds, and it's just sort of in the back of all of our minds, is this thing that we're afraid of because it's going to take over the world, and you know, the robots will come, they will kill us, right? It's in all of these movies, right? It's, you know, 2001: Space Odyssey, you know, takes over. So there's this thing about technology, or what we think technology is, which is always the latest thing, technology. However, for me, it's rather than a bottleneck, and sometimes there are limits, for sure, but there are limits with everything, right? So technology for me, it's actually an enabler, right? And a lot of the things that I do are sort of borrowing poetic ideas from technology itself, right? So I strongly believe in this term, the poetics of code, right? So how you program is poetic. It's not just a very practical engineering thing. But it's true that today, if you want to make music with technology, then you have to know acoustics, and you have to know programming, and you have to know a little bit about, you know, electrical engineering. You have to film your own videos. You have to be your own manager also, right? So I don't know. I think it's a huge question. But for me, it's more like a source of inspiration, and you kind of push the medium to the limits, and then it gives you something, and then you put back something in by programming, and then it gives you something, and then it's like a virtuous cycle.
I would like to add a couple of thoughts. First of all, composers always used the last technology, and those are the ones that became famous. Picture of a Baroque organ with 100 registers and people, some child or young people putting air into the system so the sound can go into the church. And it's a fantastic technology machine. And then think that when the pianoforte was there, that was the last thing when Mozart composed for it. So what is the anomaly? What is absolutely strange? The strange is that we are in the 21st century, but there is a standard for composing with the 19th century instruments. We were pure, were the maximum technology during the late 19th century and beginning of the 20th, when they made such an acoustic progression that they could melt the instruments of the strings, so you don't know if they are the violas or the cello that they are playing, or you don't know if they are the trombones or the trumpets, or you have only one sound for the whole brass section. That was a goal. That was a goal in Mahler time, and Mahler used that. But what is amazing is 100 years later, because it was 1909 when he died, wasn't it? So more than 100 years later, we find composers, and those are the ones that are mostly in the academia, and are mostly played and mostly programmed, that are using the goal of Mahler. But the real music today is this one. We have a fantastic demonstration today.
More comments, maybe, to round it off?
Yes.
One more. Please.
I just wanted to expand his question. I see you are using free software. What's the meaning for you to use free software, and which impact do you think can cause in places like Latin America, where the resources are scarce?
Did everybody hear the question asking about the software that's being
Free
used?
software.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
I think this is just for the purposes of recording.
It's for
Maybe
recording.
I'm going to take 1 second and do that.
Bravo.
Technology. We've been carrying the stand. So, yeah, this is open source technology. It's Pure Data is the name of the software, and I am kind of an activist of it in terms of when I teach, I feel it's most responsible to teach a software that you don't have to pay for. So, yeah.
that respect the forced liberty of the user.
Right.
Like it means also open source, not means like it's free of cost.
Of course, no.
Free software.
Yes, free software in terms of well, freedom, and then free, like literally you don't have to pay for it. But it's also open source. So all the software that I write, I put online, and it's free also, and you can download it. But most importantly, you can see the code and you can learn from it. So when I was still living in Peru, and we organized a festival, and we brought artists from all over the world, and we had them give. We were talking about this earlier. We had them give workshops, and so it was at that time a way of having them introduce the tools they were using. And I have to say that it had a great impact for me, for sure, and for 2 or 3 people that I knew at the time got really engaged with this. And you just had to go online, find the documentation, download it, and use it. And the hardest part was actually getting documentation in Spanish. I had the luck of speaking English at the time. It wasn't as good as it is now because I've been here for many years. But I was able to read and find information and work and learn. And to this day, I still give workshops. I've given workshops in Peru and in Mexico and in Venezuela. And I keep doing this often, and I always use this software, which I think is the way to go. Because one of the other things that I learned was that you also reach limits of the basic things you can do, and then you want to know how does it work to modify it and to make your own additions to it. So seeing the source is also a very, very powerful idea, right? So. I don't know, for me it was transformational, and I hope that the students that I'm working with are also finding that.
Thank you. Thank you also for freeing us from the stand. But I think the session has been transformational, and we look forward to reading both language versions of your publication. Thank you for your performance, and all of you for your comments. And I hope you will join us now for refreshments, for tapas outside, and we can have further conversation, and you can discuss further with the artists and scholars who are here today. So thank you all for coming.